fellow human beings, Power Gamer here, and everyone knows that old saying, first is the worst, second is the best, third is the one that's a little bit of both.
Mega Man 3, making one step forward and two steps back. One of the more divisive Mega Man games, people seem to regard this as either one of the best games in the series or one of the worst. I know I'm certainly guilty of committing the latter, and ironically, so is Keiji Inafune. Development of the game began shortly after the release of Mega Man 2, and during that time, Akira Kitamura, co-creator of the series, left Capcom. So the game was instead directed by Masayoshi Kurakawa, who would end up leaving the project during the game's production, so Inafune was forced to take over. The development of the game was reportedly very time-sensitive and very stressful, and the team ended up releasing the game before they believed it was ready in order to meet the deadline. As a result of this, Inafune claimed it was one of his least favorite games in the series due to both the product itself and what it took to make it. The game was released on September 28th, 1990 in Japan, with North America getting it on November 16th and Europe not getting it until June 23rd, 1992. Reception for the game was mostly positive upon release, but many people were split on whether or not it was better or worse than its predecessors. It sold over 1 million copies worldwide, so it did better than the first game, but not as good as the second one. And for the first time ever, the North American version actually had a decent box art this time. It took them 3 tries, but they finally got it.
I have played this game before, and I don't remember liking it very much, but there have been plenty of games I enjoyed more the second time around, like Crash Bandicoot and Link to the Past, so maybe that'll be the case for this one. Let's head back into the Legacy Collection and find out.
The game sadly doesn't have an opening like Mega Man 2 did, so we have a step back before the game even starts. Dr. Wily has apparently reformed after trying to take over the world twice, and everyone seems to just go along with it. Yeah, I buy that as much as I buy the original game's cover art being considered good. So now both him and Dr. Light are working together on a giant peacekeeping robot named Gamma, because all peacekeeping robots are enormous. But 8 robot masters have mysteriously gone haywire and stolen the 8 crystals used to power Gamma, so now it's up to Mega Man to stop them. The story's about as deep as before, and so are the visuals. The graphics are still pretty solid, but many of the backgrounds don't have as much complexity as they did in Mega Man 2. It still looks better than the first game though, but thankfully the soundtrack is once again awesome. Again, not quite as strong as before, but still pretty good. The performance of this game though is worse than any other NES game I have ever played in my entire life. It's like they took the performance issues from the first 2 games, put them together, and then doubled them. The sprite flickering gets abysmal when there's more than a couple enemies on screen, and the slowdown, Jesus Christ, the slowdown. It's even worse than Mega Man 1, and it's nearly unplayable every time it happens. I can see why the developers didn't think this game was ready to ship, because good God, this is awful.
The core gameplay is identical to the first 2 games, jumping, shooting, getting new weapons, etc. However, there is one major difference, and that's a new addition to Mega Man's moveset.
By holding down and pressing the jump button, Mega Man can slide for a few feet. This allows you to dodge enemy attacks and go under narrow platforms. This is a pretty solid ability that can be really useful for dealing with enemies, especially Robot Masters and these annoying jumpy giants that are back from Mega Man 1. In terms of level design, it adds a lot of small areas that you have to slide under, and yeah, that's about it, really. Aside from that, though, this game feels like a downgrade from before. The level designs are way simpler, and they have some branching paths, but it's much more linear than Mega Man 2, and the enemies are pretty generic. But worst of all is this game seems to go back to the Mega Man 1 philosophy of spamming cheap obstacles everywhere. There aren't as many instant kill spikes, but there's still tons of enemies that swarm you, and they're nearly impossible to deal with because of the slowdown. It's miserable, and it's one of the primary reasons I'm using the Legacy Collection, because having to go through this stuff over and over again sounds awful. The 8 Robot Masters this time around are Spark Man, Snake Man, Needle Man, Top Man, Shadow Man, Magnet Man, Gemini Man, and Hard Man. Wait. Hard Man? Hard Man? Hard Man? Really? Really? Why do they name a boss that? The Robot Masters are about on par with before, and thankfully you still have E-Tanks, which can restore your health, although they're still pretty scarce. And you're gonna need them because you take a weirdly large amount of damage just by touching the bosses in this game. In fact, just touching them does more damage than their actual attacks. Like, just why? That doesn't make any sense.
Because the Robot Masters are more based on objects rather than elements like fire or water, it makes it a lot tougher to guess which ones are weak to which weapon. Some of them make sense, but others are just ridiculous.
The first stage I did was Magnet Man. It has a bunch of magnets that pull you towards them. Shocking, I know. Magnet Man jumps around shooting magnets at you and pulls you towards him with this magnetic charge. He's weak to Spark Man's weapon. Next was Hard Man. This level is pretty uninteresting, aside from the fact that it has 2 times the slowdown goes into overdrive. He shoots his fist out and slams the ground to stun you. He's weak to Magnet Man's weapon. Top Man stage has enemies that shoot tops at you and this giant cat guy. This is the easiest boss in the game. He shoots 3 tops at you, then spins, and you have to jump over him. That's it. He's weak to Hard Man's weapon. On to Shadow Man. This level has these tiny things that are a pain, moments where it goes dark, and these parachuters. He jumps around and throws giant shurikens. He's weak to Top Man's weapon. Sparkman, this level has lightning gates, enemies that slow the game to a crawl, and these garbage blocks that you have to shoot through. All Sparkman does is shoot an electric ball and tiny blasts in all 8 directions. He's weak to Shadow Man's weapon. Next to Snake Man. The whole level looks like a snake, and that's about it. He runs back and forth shooting snakes at you, and is weak to Needle Man's weapon. Gemini Man's level has you shoot through these orbs which spawn enemies. During the fight, he clones himself and shoots tiny pellets. He's weak to Snake Man's weapon. Finally is Needle Man. Most of the enemies shoot spikes, and there's these giant ones that emerge from the ceiling. Needle Man just jumps in the air and shoots tiny needles at you. He's weak to Gemini Man's weapon. The level designs for this game are nowhere near as memorable as previously. I was struggling to remember what happens in each stage. The weaknesses aren't as even in this game as there were previously, since it's more like there's 2 separate lines rather than just one. While 2 had its weaknesses go like this, 3 has its weaknesses go like this. Because of this, you're gonna need to beat at least 2 Robot Masters without their weaknesses instead of just 1, which is another reason this game is so much harder than 2.
The weapons themselves are also a massive downgrade from before.
The Magnet Missile just shoots magnets that can fly up or down, which can be useful but also really inaccurate. The Hard Knuckle is a fist that's really strong, but it's too slow to be reliable. The Top Spin is the worst weapon in Mega Man history, since it just makes you spin around and its range is pathetically short. I literally never use this thing unless I had to. The Shadow Blades are shurikens that are pretty much just a worse version of the Metal Blades from the previous game, since you can aim them upwards but not downwards, and they have less range. The Spark Plug is just an electric shot that doesn't work on most enemies, so it's about as useful as the Atomic Fire from Mega Man 2. The Search Snake just runs on the ground and along walls, so unless the enemy is tiny, it's pretty much useless. The Gemini Laser is strong, but if you miss, it bounces around a few times and you can't fire another one or even pause the game until it disappears or hits something. And the Needle Cannon is just a weaker version of your Arm Blaster, but if you hold the button, you can rapid fire, which is kinda useful. The only weapon I got a decent use out of was the Shadow Blades. I occasionally used the Magnet Missile and Needle Cannon, and the Hard Knuckle was good for mini-bosses and nothing else. Everything else I ended up barely using, since they're either too situational or your standard shot is just better than them. You still get a cool intro when you get the weapons, but they're overall nowhere near as good as they were in Mega Man 2.
This game totally dropped the ball with the weapons, but it did do something great with the other abilities.
Instead of the items like in Mega Man 2, you now have access to this robot dog named Rush, and he's awesome. He has 3 different abilities you unlock throughout the game. Rush Coil, which is a spring that bounces you upward, Rush Marine, where he turns into a submarine that lets you move around underwater, and Rush Jet, where he turns into a hoverboard letting you fly around. Rush is easily the best thing about this game, since his abilities are much more useful and versatile than the items from before. He's also a dog, and that automatically makes him amazing. Who's a good boy? The other big addition to this game is a new mini-boss called Breakman. He pops in during a few of the levels, and you have to beat him before moving on. He always plays this whistle before showing up, and his powers are very similar to that of Mega Man. He just runs back and forth, jumps around firing at you, and blocks your shots when he's not shooting. You just need to hit him enough times, and then he leaves. It's honestly not that interesting.
Once you beat all the Robot Masters, that means it's time to head into the final levels, right? Nope. Instead, we get what is hands down the worst part of the entire game.
After defeating them all and getting back the crystals, this happens. You now have to replay half of the game's levels, only with much harder level design, to fight Dock Robots, which are these giant robots that absorb the powers of the Robot Masters from the last game. And there's 2 in each level, so you have to fight a nearly identical boss 8 freaking times. They move insanely fast, hit like a truck, do an absurd amount of damage if you touch them, and while they do have weaknesses, you just need a blind guess which one is weak to which. On top of that, the level designs somehow get even more frustrating, with the worst example being in Needle Man stage, where you need to ride Rush Jet across this giant gap. Problem is, it's so long, you need to grab these ammo containers to keep going, but they don't respawn if you die, so you only get 1 shot at this, and these levels are very stingy with their checkpoints, hence why the Legacy Collection is a godsend. In Shadow Man stage, he absorbs Woodman, which makes him weak to the Needle Cannon, and Heat Man, which makes him weak to the Top Spin. In Spark Man stage, he absorbs Metal Man, which makes him weak to the Magnet Missile, and Quick Man, which makes him weak to the Gemini Laser. In Gemini Man stage, he absorbs Flash Man, which makes him weak to the Needle Cannon again, and Bubble Man, which makes him weak to the Spark Plug. And finally, in Needle Man stage, he absorbs Air Man, which also makes him weak to the Spark Plug, and Crash Man, which makes him weak to the Hard Knuckle.
I have no idea why they thought this was a good idea. This is honestly one of the most irritating things I've ever done in a game. You have to replay half of the game to fight a nearly identical boss over and over and over again, and the boss wasn't even fun to begin with. This is not creative, it's not interesting, it's not fun, it's padding. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Once you finally destroy all of them, you have one final showdown with Breakman. You then return to the lab and discover the crystals and Gamma have been stolen by none other than Dr. Wily. Who could have possibly seen this coming? We get more of him bobbing his eyebrows. and invade another castle. I guess he just had to spare one in the back. With how annoying the rest of the game can be, the Wily stages are weirdly easy, and they're really short too. First one, you just need to climb some ladders and go through some water to find this machine that shoots exploding turtles at you. Second stage, you have to avoid these bees before fighting, oh no, not the yellow devil again. Thankfully, he's a bit easier than last time since he moves slower, but this attack right here, I have no idea how to avoid. He's weak to the hard knuckle this time. Third stage, you have to keep climbing upwards and you'll eventually fight a bunch of clones that are weak to the search snake. And the fourth stage is the boss rush where you rematch the robot masters before confronting Wily. He's in this weird spider thing, and first you have to shoot this cannon with the hard knuckle and then shoot this part in the middle, which I could only do with the shadow blades. He then begs for forgiveness again and okay, that's pretty funny. But now we have to actually deal with him and Gamma. Use the shadow blades while he shoots these tiny pellets that are really easy to avoid, and then he starts punching you. You have to jump on the fist and get to this platform to hit Wily, but he can only be damaged by one weapon. And which weapon is that, you might ask? The freaking top spinner. Now he actually begs for forgiveness. I think you've lost your privilege for that, but the place starts to collapse. Mega Man is crushed by a block, but then apparently saved by Breakman. And well, at least he didn't intentionally leave Wily this time. Mega Man wakes up back in the lab, and Dr. Light hears Breakman's whistle and discovers that he's actually Proto Man, who is the original prototype for Mega Man. Mega Man runs off, and we finish the game with a look back at Dr. Light's robots.
Game Conquer. I don't really like Mega Man 3. While it did introduce some staples for the Mega Man series like Rush and the slide ability, it overall feels like a downgrade from Mega Man 2. This game has a lot of the same issues that were in Mega Man 1, but honestly, I find them worse here. Not only because they could be slightly more excused in the first game, since it's the first game, they had never tried something like this before, but also because this game is so much longer, so you have to deal with a lot more of it. Honestly, unless you want to get the Legacy collections and go through the entire series, I'd recommend skipping this game. The fact that it feels the need to pad itself out with the Doc Robot stuff just makes it not very fun to play. I mean, who in their right mind would enjoy going through half of the game all over again just so you can fight the same boss 8 times? Apparently someone with too much money.